Friend, today's guest is not only a client of mine, but he's become a good friend of mine. And the reason for that is because Dr. Evan Nadler is not just a pediatric surgeon or an obesity expert, or a co-founder of amazing businesses, and his ideology and the time he spends in working with our world is really dedicated to his mission. He spent decades on the front lines of childhood obesity treatments, including as a former co-director of the Children's Obesity Institute. But now he's expanding beyond the operating room into the digital arena, building a platform, developing a powerful new book, which we'll talk about here in just a few, and the way he's using media to educate, advocate, and lead. We're having a very interesting time in our culture today where the topic of obesity is sort of not only coming up, but there is all kinds of policy being developed around these ideas. There's all kinds of people who know what the hell they're talking about, and there's all kinds of people who don't know what the hell they're talking about. And the thing I love about Dr. Evan Nadler is that he is here to kind of share the truth and the honest truth from his years of experience. And so we're kind of going beyond, the surgery room into storytelling, and how he's been able to grow his influence beyond the hospital, of course. And, what it's like to kind of go through these times of change in our way of how we see health in America. Dr. Evan Nadler, man, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate you, my friend.
Hussein, my pleasure. And thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's go back a little bit in time and I just want to talk a little bit about your mission. I want to go back and what originally pulled you into the fight against childhood obesity. What kind of got that sort of fire going? How far back are we talking here?
We're talking, 2000, I think. So 25 years ago. And wasn't necessarily part of the overall plan. There aren't people who really go into pediatric surgery with the mission or goal of treating 300-pound 15-year-olds or 10-year-olds with type 2 diabetes. That's sort of not what the game plan necessarily looked like at the get-go. But, everybody has their epiphany moment. And I guess my epiphany moment was sitting poolside at one of the Disney properties in May of 2000, where I was presenting some research data from my lab. I was still a trainee at this point. And I remember saying to my wife, looking around the pool, wow, someone needs to do something about health in America, obesity in America, and especially these kids, because at the pool, there were just a bunch of different folks with all kinds of different body types and shapes. And, I couldn't tell what their health was, but I was presuming that some of their health issues were there. And that was sort of the moment. And I even have like the vivid memory of one of the people at the poolside, a kid with a big greasy hamburger and a 2-liter bottle of Coke and a 1-pound bag of chips. And just thinking to myself, it's like 95 degrees out and sweltering hot. And here's what this young kid is doing to beat the heat. So anyway, that was sort of the epiphany moment. And then from there, just one thing led to another to get me here.
Yeah. So, this path and this idea of like obesity, childhood obesity, where we are with unhealthy foods and perhaps lack of exercise and movement is really, as I've gotten to know you and as I've gotten to know your work, is really one aspect of the issue. It's not the full spectrum. So in my mind, obviously, like when you see a really overweight person, well, it's hard not to judge. First of all, we shouldn't be judging. Right? Let's just be real. But immediately what we think about is like, oh, this person must be over consuming food, right? Like it's just like the very visual thing, right? Because we just associate with more food equals bigger belly. Okay, this is even true for me, right? Like I'm like, the more food I eat, the bigger the burger, the bigger the belly tomorrow, right? Okay.
The
So
truth for
we've kind of
everybody.
established that. What's that?
It says it's kind of the truth for most people.
Right. Right. And so we kind of established that. But then there's the exercise component, which there's the whole diet and exercise world of side of things with obesity and really just being healthy. But your side of the world, you've sort of narrowed down on this idea that, look, there is this is a disease that is sadly covered and shrouded in mystery. And it's shrouded with all this stuff that does kind of make sense. Yeah, exercise and eat well, you'll feel better and you'll do this. But there's a deeper layer than that, because when you mentioned to me, like Hussein, how does it make sense that a 6-year-old, right, that is obese and they haven't had 20, 30 years of McDonald's or whatever bad food people, we want to consume, right? And that got me thinking. I'm like, okay, so it's got to be beyond that. Can you share a little bit about that sort of idea that you came to, that it's much more complicated than what meets the eye?
Yeah. So that's the key, is that it's much more complicated than meets the eye. And unfortunately, obesity is one of those diseases that you can see, like you can't hide it. So everybody thinks they know how you got the disease and what you can do to fix it, because that's just the way we are as people. Right. But the reality is that, when you start taking care of people with obesity, you realize that a lot of them don't overeat, and a lot of them don't eat crap all the time. And a lot of them have family histories that have weight issues on both mom's side and dad's side. So that's sort of what got me started thinking about the different ways obesity can come to be. And I kind of have two taglines. One is that obesity is a disease and not a lifestyle choice, and there's something you can do about it. So that's one thing I try to tell people, is that, it's not, you didn't choose to have weight issues. You didn't choose to have genes susceptible to weight gain. It's just the hand you were dealt. So let's do something about it. And then the other sort of tagline, which is a little bit more complicated and a little bit more medical, which is that obesity is a phenotype, which means that's the way a disease looks on the outside, but it comes from a bunch of different genotypes, which means the way you get that disease. So you don't know, when you're looking at somebody, they might have had a brain tumor and had brain surgery, and that's why they have obesity. And you probably would judge that person differently than your typical judgmental self that might think that obesity is a disease of overeating and underexercising, which, again, there are people, there's a spectrum of different diseases maybe, or there are people who might have food addiction. There are people who probably could eat better and be healthier, but then there are a whole bunch of people who none of that stuff really can work for. So I try to just tell folks to be open-minded, think about it like they would think about any other disease that can come from a bunch of different ways, and try to separate. And this is true for providers as well, or physicians as well, is like separate your biases from the patient and just sort of deal with what's in front of you.
Yeah, it's really powerful. And to control our bias and not just immediately assume, right? And there's a level of empathy that is involved here too, right? Like, I feel like when someone has, a cancerous disease, we immediately, I think of myself, I guess I shouldn't say we, I just think of myself like, oh man, I wish, to be honest, it's like, I wish I could do something for that person, right? I wish I can help that person or whatever. And it's like, if you can carry that level of empathy as well and you don't need to help and solve everyone's problems, because everyone's different. But it's the same empathy level that we need to have for people that have obesity. This is a very complex disease that is so much further and so much deeper than what we think and what we know. And it's like every conversation that has anything to do with weight is literally about food and exercise. And the fact that you brought forth this concept of like, no, dude, there's genes, there's like systemic, there's so many environmental, there's so many, your great grandparents have like, there's so many levels to this like complexity that when you actually put them all together, it's the situation starts to make a little bit more sense. There's more pieces to the puzzle that come together. And now someone like you who helps people in surgery, can we talk a little bit about that? You've obviously been a surgeon for quite some time. You still are. And especially with childhood obesity, what have you found in the types of surgeries that you sort of go and do? What have you found? What kind of results happen thereafter when you perform certain types of surgeries?
Yeah. So first, I want to go back to a couple of things you said. One is that
Sure.
Empathy is huge, right? Like, it's human nature almost to not be empathetic for people who have potentially contributed to their health issues. For instance, you see smokers, smoker gets lung cancer. Lots of people are kind of like, well, they got lung cancer, so I don't really feel that bad for them. They made a choice to do something that's really not good for their health, which again, actually, I think is unfair, but people tend to do that. And then they think the same thing about obesity. Well, that person, child or adult, and maybe the child, it wasn't the child, but it was the child's parents. But either way, there's a lot of patient blame. And then on the patient side, there's shame because they feel shamed by their providers or by society or by whomever. So just getting rid of all that, just getting rid of the bias, your internal biases, shame and blame, just getting rid of all that stuff goes a long way. And goes a long way no matter what treatment algorithm you decide to pursue. Now, I started doing surgery on kids for obesity 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago now. And when I first started doing it, people thought I was nuts. I have lots of stories about me personally being not just challenged in what I was doing, but, name calling at national meetings for offering surgery to children with obesity. Now I'm sort of feeling like I've gotten the last laugh because all those people who called me a monster are now like understanding that I actually just knew more about the disease at the time than they did. But it became pretty clear to me and to my colleagues who I was working with in the pediatric medical world, that there were a lot of children who just were not going to respond to not only just diet and exercise, but then medications, whatever medications were available back then. So it started slow, a couple cases here and there. And then by the time I stopped doing it full time 2 years ago now, almost, there were about 125 or so patients every year who were getting a surgery with me. Wow. And the results obviously supported my continuing to offer that therapy, because if it didn't work, I wouldn't have kept doing it. So in general, children with obesity who undergo weight loss surgery or bariatric surgery or metabolic and bariatric surgery, whatever you want to call it, can have actually their data now that shows that they can have positive health effects 15 years after their surgery. And in even some cases, they have health benefits even if they have a little bit of weight regain. So it's really not only the most effective obesity intervention currently for kids and adults, but it's actually the most cost effective because, it's a one-time upfront cost, and then you save on medications, you save on treating high blood pressure or diabetes or high cholesterol or something else. So it's really a great option for some people, but I'm not going to be the kind of guy who tells you this is what you need to do. We all need to be patient-centric as providers, and this is sort of my whole MO or modus operandi is just give people all the information that you have available to you. and give it in an unbiased manner. Just try to stick to the data as best we know them. I don't want to call them facts because sometimes data change over time, and then just help the patient and family come to their own decision about what they think is best for them, whether that's diet and exercise, whether it's medication, whether it's surgery. Just embrace that place where the child and family are at that time, and then work with them. And if intervention 1 doesn't work, you move on to intervention 2. And if intervention 2 doesn't work, there's intervention 3. And they can be done in any order. You can start with 3 and then go back to 2. All the interventions require some diet and exercise changes, but those changes are a lot easier to make actually once you've either started a medication or had surgery. So that's sort of how we go about it. That's sort of what my philosophy is anyway.
Yeah, it's really powerful, man. That's one thing I really admire about your work, is that you are so patient centric and you are very intent on listening to what their needs are, and not just offering up one solution, but perhaps multiple solutions, multiple different solutions. I think that's very important, and that aligns perfectly with your advocacy work, if you will, your mission of just like, look, this person needs help. Whatever that looks like. It doesn't have to be surgery. It could be other ways. And if there is a better way, let's do that instead. And I think that's so important. So can we talk a little bit about, I don't want to go too deep into this world, but I want to talk a little bit about, I feel like we can't have this conversation without, of course, Ozempic and all the other, injectables, if you will. I know you've mentioned a lot on your YouTube channel and, general online presence that you talk about. It's, there's of course the Ozempics, but there's also like pills. There's also like just diet and exercise, because depending on the person, they may not need all these other things, right? But we also know, like, this is something that you really brought to my attention, which is, obesity is tied to these other things that are causing pain and misery and stuff, which is, diabetes and depression. And like you said, like, it's not just the disease, it's everything around it. And then everyone else that's impacted around it. Like, so there's people involved in this, right? Like your parents, your family, your friends, so on. So can we talk a little bit though about sort of the fast growing Ozempic, take an injection, lose the appetite, lose the weight, so on and so forth. I guess, can we talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, and what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, first, you said better way.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the right way to say that, but
because there is no better way, and there's no best way, right? The best way is whatever works for you as the patient. Right. I can say that surgery is the intervention that achieves the most weight loss for the longest period of time.
Right.
Is that better? I mean, that's most effective, but is that better? Not if you're not ready for it, or not if you're not into it. So, so the better way is whatever works for you as an individual, as long as your health isn't in dire, if you're on insulin for type 2 diabetes, then I can probably say that surgery is better than, I can definitely say that surgery is better than diet and exercise. And I can probably say that surgery is better than medications. But the huge medication pipeline, the GLP-1 injectables, and there are oral pills, GLP-1 pills that are under development that we may see in the next 6 months or so. And they've sort of changed the national dialogue, because there's sort of we talk about the stigma of obesity and the bias against people with obesity. That same stigma exists for bariatric surgery. Like, people still say bariatric surgery is an easy way out. People are still petrified of general anesthesia and having a procedure. And there's so much misinformation about bariatric surgery in general that still only 1% of people who are eligible for it in the country end up getting it. And that number really hasn't changed for 30 years. But what these new medications are finally sort of able to achieve is weight loss that's getting closer to surgery, although not quite there yet. And maybe with the next generations, we will get there, but maybe not. And they're using actually mechanisms that have shown to be important in surgery. So a lot of what's been learned is related to what's been learned from surgery. But like the GLP-1 drugs were actually initially designed for diabetes treatment, and weight loss was a side effect. And then the companies that were involved realized that that side effect could be quite important for some people, and changed the medications so that they would achieve more weight loss. But really, I mean, again, if you think about it, 140 million adults have obesity in the United States. 1% are getting surgery. So that means the other 99% are probably not getting any healthier. Or let's say we'll give 10% that might be getting healthier with diet and exercise. So now you have this huge group of people that can benefit from medications, and people are just more used to taking medications. People take, blood pressure medications every day or cholesterol medications every day. And will there be a time where people are taking their weight loss medications every day in a pill form? It's possible. It's certainly possible, especially with these new ones that aren't, that aren't injectables. But there's a lot to be learned still, and a lot of science that's unknown. And I actually think it may be that people will start with the injectables because they achieve fairly rapid weight loss. And then the pills will be sort of like the maintenance phase. And maybe you don't take your pill every day. Maybe you take it every other day, or the dose is lower or something. But the medications are so new that there are a lot of people who are using them in different ways. And we don't really know what's the best balance of how to use them so that you can lose weight, but then maintain your weight and still be healthy for as long as possible.
Yeah, it's definitely, obviously, it's not as new as we think, because I feel like this has been a progression, and once it hit sort of mainstream, if you will, the secret sort of was out, and the marketing levers started working for these drugs, right, and made them really desirable. But I think, like everything else in our society and our culture, I feel like any quick fix is going to come with something. And it may, and especially with this kind of stuff, right? It's going to depend on who you are, your body, your culture, there's so many aspects to this. And so I think it's just interesting what's happening, the dynamic shift of what does it mean to be healthy, how to get healthy, whether it be surgery, pills, injectable, there's a variety now. And like you said, I love that you're an advocate for just, look, you got to really sit down with someone, really understand your options, what makes sense to you. Just deciding to take action based on the fact that you just want to lose weight, and not doing proper research could later come back and bite you in some way, shape, or form. Maybe that's not fully true. I don't know, but just from my understanding of working with you and understanding the world of obesity and the world of just health, I feel like it's a slow progression and the maintenance of that. So even after you get surgery, I remember you were talking about this, even after you get surgery, like, you still pretty much promote, like, you got to eat better, you got to definitely exercise, you got to do all these things, because it's not like just because you have surgery, now you'll never get diabetes, now you'll never get whatever. It's like, no, the food you consume, which I want to talk about next, the food we consume, our culture and how it's designed, packaging and marketing, right? Because this is a huge thing in our culture today. How we design stores and grocery stores and packaging and boxes and cereals. You and I have had that conversation quite a few times. Can you share a little bit about, there's a couple of videos that I know you're launching around literally you walking through a grocery store and showing, like, okay, like, look at this cereal box and how much sugar it is, and it's supposed to be the healthiest one on the shelf, right? And it's like, sadly, it's the reverse. It's like the worst one on the shelf, right? Can you talk a little bit about what people need to be aware of when it comes to walking through a grocery store, and what we need to be looking for as far, to be honest with you, man, I've never looked at the back of the packaging more than since I met you. So just to be aware of my what I'm consuming. So shout out to you for that. But tell me a little bit about that world and how that world is designed in a bad way, kind of to work against us.
Sure. So I do, there's most of the MAHA agenda I can't really get behind because a lot of it's not particularly science-based or evidence-based.
Sure.
But the part that I can get behind is improving food quality in the United States. And I, as you brought up, it's not just the food quality, like it's the marketing to kids. I mean, it's not a coincidence that the three major fast food chains, McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's, have a clown, a puppet king, and a little girl with red pigtails as their as their logos, right? That they're marketing to kids directly because they know that if they get a kid hooked on their fast food as a kid, that's going to last a lifetime and be a financial boon for the corporation. But obviously we want to start with knowledge, and turning around a box of cereal or any other thing you're buying in the grocery store can give you a lot of information, just that most people don't do it. And it's why, like in some countries, like in, I think, Mexico now, they have the warning labels on the front so that you don't even have to turn it around. Now, is that going to make a huge difference? I don't know. But if you do look on the back, you can pick out some things that, aren't particularly good for you. And one of the easy ones is sugar. Sorry about that. You can edit that out of let me turn off my email so it doesn't happen again. Sorry about that.
You're okay. You're fine.
So one of the easy ones is to look at is sugar, right? Because it's listed there on the label. You don't need to know the difference between a monounsaturated or a polyunsaturated or a trans fat to know that more sugar is generally bad. So that's one that I typically start with when I'm talking to families because it's an easy one. And, again, you don't even realize some products that have sugar in them that you would never think about. Like, for instance, Wonder Bread, I think, has 3 grams of sugar per slice, whereas other breads might only have 1 gram. And again, that's not a huge difference. But when you look at things like energy drinks that might have up to 40 grams of sugar in them. So one little packet of sugar is about 4 grams usually. So if you think about that, one drink has 10 of those packets in them, you would never open up 10 packets of sugar and just dump them down your throat. But when you see it as part of an energy drink that's going to give you, make you feel
energy,
ready to tackle the world, people don't necessarily look or even think about it. So it's just like, it's a whole issue that a lot of the government reforms statewide and federally are looking into. But, the information is actually pretty much there on a lot of products if people really want to find it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a powerful, I think more than anything, what I love about your work is like awareness with truth from the front lines, if you will, right? It's like, look, I know this little 4 grams of sugar it's not going to change your world. But it will if it's compounded over years and years and years of consumption. And it doesn't just affect you like body weight. It affects you in so many other ways. And that you start to rely on it for a jolt in energy, a jolt in waking up, a jolt in, just happiness. Because your sugar reliance becomes so high that your body's just like, well, I don't want to manufacture anything. Just go get the drink and I'll feel good. And I've been learning so much about this brain, body, and what we consume, but also how we exercise and also how to look, I can't fix everything, which is why I have a therapist, right? Like just to talk about things sometimes that's an external thing, right? It's not surgery per se, but how do I deal with the stories in my mind? well, maybe we need to talk this stuff out and get some help and like communicate, right? And I think that's the one thing that we're afraid, or there's some kind of shame around our health in a lot of different ways, whether it be mental, physical, or just spiritual even. It's just to talk to somebody. That talking and opening up that door of awareness. And it's like, now you know, whether you decide to take that action or not, that's completely up to you. But I open myself to be like bombarded with positive information, so much so that it's like, I have to change. There's just, I know where I'm at, and I got to make this shift in my life because future me will thank me. And I always try to put future me in the present moment. And it's like, if I'm sitting across from future me, who do I want to look at? I want to look at the healthier version of me, not just the, like a one that's like old and decrepit and they're only 5 years away. Like, we got to like think about that. And I think there's nothing better than right now looking back at my life and saying, oh man, I'm so glad. Like, be honest with you, I can't even remember who it was. So shout out to that person. But they were like, do you know what's inside that Pepsi that you're drinking right now? Like, the amount of stuff that's in here it's just not good for you, man. Like, over time, it's like, have one or two. I don't give a shit. It's your life. It's your world.
Yeah.
But if you compound this over the next 10 years or whatever, it's going to affect you in some way, shape, or form. And I'm like, wow, I never thought about it like that. I'm probably never going to drink a Pepsi again. And now when I do, it's like, oh my God, this is so sugary. Like, it's so, it messes with you. So anyways, taking those bits and pieces of advice from someone like you and applying them over time, it's just helpful, man. It really is.
Well, I think, I think there are a couple tenets that I like to try to tell people. One is that just because something works for you doesn't mean it's going to work for your neighbor. So just because,
Sure.
You could change your behavior just by knowing how bad Pepsi was, that doesn't mean the person next to you can do that. And we far too often want to just give people advice, even when it's not asked for, but like, oh, I know how to fix your weight problem. You just need to try this fad diet and do this exercise because that worked for me. And look at me now. And that's so stigmatizing for people because it often doesn't work for the next person. And then they feel like a failure because, oh, well, it worked for my neighbor, but not for me. So
love that.
That must be on me. So I try to tell people not to compare themselves to others, not to judge themselves too harshly if something doesn't work for them, because if it doesn't work for them, it's probably their biology, not their, commitment to change, or sometimes it's actually your biology that makes you have a less of a commitment to change because of how the brain works and all that stuff. Again, I think it's individualized and it needs to be individualized. And that's why I have lots of issues with the food is medicine movement or the fit at every size movement or any of the big national organizations that have their personal, I guess not personal, their society's agenda for how to fix America, or the administration, the Maha agenda is going to fix America. Like, it's so sort of what used to be called paternalistic viewpoint, which is like, I know what's best for you. Just listen to me and everything will be okay. And that basically has been sort of debunked for decades now. It's really so much of health, weight and health is individual variability, genetic susceptibility, epigenetic modifications, all sorts of big words that you don't really need to know about. But I throw them out there because you don't hear them from the current administration or from certain societies and groups who want you to, think that they know how to solve everything. So again, I try to just be, and this is sort of why I'm doing this stuff now and not no longer in academic medicine, is that I just couldn't sort of tell people the way I viewed the overall world of health with the constraints of typical academic medicine. Like, I just decided I spent a long time trying to educate other providers and other medical people. And then I gave up on all that and decided to try to take the message directly to the consumer, sort of like the direct-to-consumer advertising from the pharmaceutical industry, but in my sense, hopefully with a little bit more honesty and without a hidden agenda of something I'm trying to sell you.
Yeah. This is actually a perfect gateway into the next segment of this conversation, which is, you've put a lot of energy, resources, and time into this idea of educating just general public, people who struggle with this disease. And I got to commend you for that. Not only did you hire us to help support you in that way, which I genuinely appreciate. It's been such an interesting world to understand and think about how to use your message and market it in the most organic way we can, right? And so that it feels natural, it feels real because it is. But positioning you in front of a camera and saying, all right, man, here are the things that we're going to talk about, or here are the ideas for these videos, but you always take it a step further. And I really appreciate that about you. But how is that, in the last, I would say probably 8 months, that you've sort of diverted the energy into going direct to consumer, if you will, with this information about how to understand obesity? And your channel's called Obesity Explained, which I love, and I'll share here. You can check it out, obesityexplained.com. Dr. Evan, you really entrusted us with this work, and I appreciate you. However, you're an example of someone I tell a lot of people about, as far as how you're intending to build your online presence, your brand, and of course, and I want to talk about this next, your soon to come book. And so, what has that been like for you? I know at some times it's been arduous, at other times it's been exciting and fun. What's it been like for you?
So similar to not going into pediatric surgery because I envisioned myself becoming a childhood obesity champion. I didn't become a childhood obesity champion thinking that at age 55, I was going to try to pivot to being an internet social media influencer. That was never part of my game plan. And I'm not so sure I'm any good at it, but I'm going to keep trying because that's just sort of my way. But it's been, so the book, which we'll get to in a bit, actually the idea for the book started in 2017. And 8 years ago, it was just way too cutting edge. People were like, holy, there was no interest in it because, because of my theses at that time, which are basically the same as they are now, just the rest of the world hadn't gotten there yet. So now that people have sort of started to catch up, there hopefully is some interest in what I have to say. But it turns out, if you're going to try to publish a book through traditional means, through not self-published, but through publishers, they are interested in your internet reach, your social media presence. So out of necessity, I just was like, all right, well, if this is what I got to do, then I'm going to do it. Because at this point I'm committed and the message in my mind is so important to get out there. And even now more important because there's so many social media influencers who are giving misinformation. There's the administration that's giving misinformation. And then, like I said before, there are the medical groups themselves that are also giving misinformation. And it's like, if somebody doesn't sort of try to head it off at the pass, then it's just going to go, wild, or it's already gone wild. So I almost feel compelled at this point that, again, people can ignore what I have to say, but I'm going to say it. And It's going to be all backed with data, not opinion, although there's some opinion from all my clinical experience. But most of it is data that either I've published or others have published that I reviewed or read. And, again, I'm not here to dictate to anyone what they do with that information. I just do feel personally almost like a mission-driven need to get the information out there.
Yeah. And of course, it's nice to have a balance of truth coming from someone in your world, from your world, right? Like you are literally, like, you're a traveling doctor. For those who don't know, Dr. Evan is literally somewhere else right now, not home, helping people go, like literally doing surgeries, doing what it takes to be the doctor that he is, and serving people in different parts of the country. So, and the man travels literally across the world to do this work. So the level of commitment and the level of mission that you've been on is really admirable. And I'm grateful I get to be a small part of it. And why I loved your mission was because I'm like, man, we just need to get a camera in front of this guy and let him just do his thing. That's like my philosophy. And, I think your YouTube channel is amazing. If you're out there and you are, or someone is struggling with this stuff, the way that Dr. Evan approaches this stuff is honestly remarkable. It's not there to like make you feel bad or any of that stuff. It's just great information so that you become more aware of what's happening with you, what's happening with someone else. And for me personally, what you've done for me, man, is you've raised my level of empathy for more people around the world and feel for them in a way that I don't think I've felt for them before, to be honest. And like, I feel like I see them as the humans they are, not just the way that I thought, honestly. And this is me just being 100% honest, because I didn't know anything about obesity in this way. I was like, oh, they just eat too much. Like, you got to refrain from that. And it's like, man, I want to like go back to my younger version and just slap myself silly, because that is the most ridiculous thing to think about someone else, right? And one, it's very judgmental. Two, it's very, it's not anything you want to say or share or whatever, but it's something you feel and you think about that inside. It's like, man, this person would probably be really healthy if they ate well. And that is the most silly idea I think I ever conjured in my brain, especially having gotten to meet you and really breaking that whole system down for me. So,
Again,
if anything,
I wouldn't blame yourself for having that.
Right. I mean, I think that's our culture too, but yeah.
Well, you've been taught. I mean, our culture has taught everybody to feel that way. So again,
Yeah.
I'm all about giving themselves a break and not judging themselves too harshly. But so if I've gotten you to be more empathetic toward people with obesity, that's an amazing achievement in and of itself. And that like makes me feel good just knowing that, because that's sort of the overall goal in general, is just to get people to treat each other nicer, better, happier, like have some empathy, don't be so judgmental. Like that's sort of like the underlying goal of the whole thing. Because the disease is complex and we've never really learned about it properly. And there's, a lot of people are struggling and just need help, and the shame and blame doesn't help at all. But the idea again is just, I just want to give people the information in a agenda-free, unbiased manner, and then people can do with it what they want. Again, I don't really, yes. Do I want everybody to get healthier? Yes. But there are reasons why people can't, whether it be you don't have access to healthy foods, you don't have access to medical care, you don't have money to buy, medications out of pocket, and your insurance doesn't cover it. I mean, and then there, as you brought up before, there are a million mental health reasons that don't really necessarily get considered enough. And it works both ways. There are mental health issues that may lead to weight problems, and and then people with weight problems have a higher incidence of having secondary mental health issues. So it's all intertwined. And again, it just irks me when I hear people try to simplify the issue into one topic: bad food, ultra processed food, or take your pick of whatever's been blamed over the last 50 years or so. So especially in childhood obesity, there's a large genetic component, but even what I say with the genetic component doesn't apply to everybody. Like, it's a spectrum. There are people who, for whatever reason, have issues with their health and weight that are different, maybe not related to their genetics or their epigenetics or the environment they were born into. So anyway, again, it's more about people just having an open mind, an empathetic mind, a willingness to change, a willingness to accept new information, a willingness to have empathy for their fellow people. And I mean, it sounds sappy, but the reality is that, people with obesity still get sort of discriminated against and stigmatized, probably as much as any group in America.
Yeah. And that's so powerful. And again, you're also sort of like on the news, literally trying to advocate and share this message and word. And that isn't easy to, one, break through that and get the resources to get people to sit across from you and share those ideas. And sometimes you're being challenged, sometimes you're being supported, sometimes, it's all because all the different news outlets have different, perceptions. And so, but what's interesting as I watch all these sort of opportunities that come your way is that your message is very clear, concise, and you're all about the patient. Even though it's policy or politics or whatever, you're so good at sort of distilling the information back down to, look, here's what matters. And the health of people is what really matters to me. And I'm just trying to share a message. And that always resonates with me. It's so beautiful, man, because it's really a part of your online presence in general and just who you are. So last question, really, it's, how, like, if there are other experts out there, right? The variety of people, authors, people who want to become authors like yourself, you're sort of on that verge, you're headed in that direction, you're going traditional publishing route. Yeah. But you're going down that path, in a way that honestly, I don't see very many other people doing. You're very resilient. You take it day by day, week by week. What's a piece of advice that you would give another expert who is, in a way trying to get their message out there, in a way trying to build their thing? What's your recommendation to them?
Well, I guess I would start by sort of having a similar feeling to the whole health issue and obesity issue, which is there are a bunch of different ways you can get there, right? And just because I chose this path doesn't mean that this path is necessarily right for some other person who wants to write a book or get their message out there. The one thing I think, endorse without reservation is just effort. It used to be people would say things like, in medical world, for instance, medical school, like, there might be people who are smarter than me, but there's not going to be anybody who outworks me when it comes to like studying or taking your tests or doing whatever, like showing up at the office, doing the work, being the first person in the hospital at the beginning of the day and the last person to leave at the end of the day. Like, those are things that are within your control, right? The amount of effort you put into anything. And I've just never been a half-assed person. I don't really know how to half-ass anything. So once I get into it, I get in there with both feet and give it all my attention. And, some of my entrepreneurial endeavors have not worked out. And so that's another kind of lesson, which is like, stuff doesn't work out sometimes, and don't like beat yourself up about it. Just pick yourself up and move on to the next. And whether that be, like if I can't get publishing deal, let's say, I'll self-publish and I'll still do all this stuff and I'll still try to get my message out there. Or if, I can't write the book that I want to write this time because I do get a publisher, but they make me write something that's not quite exactly what I wanted to write, then book number 2 will be exactly what I want to write. And maybe I'll self-publish that one. I don't know. So it's really just about, again, cliches and sappy cliches. Like, it doesn't matter how many times you get knocked down. It matters how many times you get up. They're all rooted in some truth, right? So that's actually, I guess if you never get up, if you keep getting knocked down and keep getting up and getting knocked down again, maybe you never achieve anything, because at some point you better hope that you get to stay up. But point is like, if you're going to do this kind of thing, which I certainly advocate that people do if they have a message they want to get to the world, it's just going to be, I mean, it hasn't been easy, and it hasn't been necessarily step by step the way I thought it would progress. And I still don't even know if I'm going to get there. But I guess that would be my one piece of advice, is that if you feel like your message is important enough, just keep trying until you get there. And even if you don't get to the exact destination you want to get to, you can get somewhere close or close enough to get your message out there, and then take another stab at that preferred destination, thereafter.
Beautiful. Dr. Evan Nadler, thank you so much, man, for just coming on the show, sharing your truth as you always done. This has been, of course, insightful, but for me, as a person who gets to work with experts like yourself and authors and things like that, I absolutely admire people who, despite challenges, despite the hurdles, despite the things that come up, because it is a squiggly line as you kind of go through this process. I admire people like you who are, adamant about sharing their message, sharing their truth in any way, shape, or form. And you really have this like whatever it takes mentality that I see very successful authors do. And I know it's going to serve you well in the long run. It has thus far, and I think it'll continue to serve you, man. So thank you for sharing that with me so that I can continue that on my work. But thank you for being on the show today, my friend. It's always good to chat with you.
My pleasure, anytime. And I mean, it goes both ways. You're helping me a lot. Hopefully I'm helping you a little bit, and then we'll go from there.
Of course. Definitely.
Right.
Thank you, Dr. Evan. Appreciate you.